Sarah moved swiftly along the bustling street, balancing the wooden tray of steaming bread on her head. Sweat ran down her neck as the midday sun scorched the city. Her worn slippers slapped against the uneven pavement, and her faded yellow dress clung to her frame, damp with heat and exertion. Yet she did not slow. Life left her no choice. Every day was a relentless cycle: wake early, rush to the bakery, collect the bread on credit, sell everything, send money to her sick mother in the village, and stretch whatever remained for transport and school supplies. She was in her final year at university, but education offered no mercy when hunger was constant. Survival demanded effort, and sometimes her only means of supporting her mother was walking the streets with her heavy tray until her legs screamed and her back ached. Her mother had been ill for months, entirely dependent on her. Lecturers grumbled about her absences, unaware she often attended lectures on an empty stomach or slept in stairwells when she arrived late and found gates locked. Life pressed her so hard that crying felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Fresh bread. Hot bread, she shouted, voice cracking. Cars swerved around her, horns blaring, but she moved forward. A black jeep slowed beside her. Her heart jumped. People in expensive cars usually ignored street hawkers or yelled at them to move, but the tinted window rolled down, revealing a man in his late 20s. He was handsome, clean-shaven, and impeccably dressed, someone who seemed to live in a world untouched by rent, bills, or hunger. "Your name?" he asked calmly. "Sarah," she whispered, eyes lowered. He nodded, staring at her as if weighing a decision. "I'm David," he said. "I need your help." Fear tightened her throat. Offers like this never ended well. I don't know," she said, shaking her head. David explained. His father pressured him to bring a woman home he intended to marry. David wanted someone to pretend to be his girlfriend for 2 months. Sarah said no immediately. She had enough problems already. She couldn't risk her reputation, her life, or her mother's fragile state for someone else's drama. But then he added something that made her hesitate. He promised a safe, clean place to stay. He promised weekly pay and no more hawking bread for 2 months. A tiny spark of hope flickered within her. A secure roof, food on the table, money to send home, she had never imagined such relief. She looked at David again. He seemed sincere, not someone plotting harm. Life had taught her caution, but the promise of peace and stability was almost irresistible. She whispered, "I don't know you." "You don't need to," he replied. "Just help me for 2 months. Everything else, I'll handle." Sarah thought of her mother, lying sick and desperate for care. She thought of the bills piling up, of books she couldn't afford, of nights spent hungry. She nodded, deciding to trust him. "Meet me tomorrow morning at the boutique near the junction," he instructed. "You'll need proper clothes to look convincing." The next morning, Sarah wore her cleanest dress, still faded, and walked to the boutique. The glass doors intimidated her, she had never been in such luxury. But David met her with a reassuring smile and guided her inside. The boutique was immaculate: soft music, bright lights, expensive perfumes, and neatly arranged clothes. Sarah crossed her arms nervously, unsure of her place. "She's with me," David said to the sales assistant. "Let her choose." "David, my son. You finally brought a woman home," he exclaimed. Sarah's cheeks burned as he complimented her. David introduced her, masking the truth with rehearsed lies: her parents were wealthy and respectable. Mr. Williams smiled, delighted by the apparent match. Sarah's heart pounded. She felt the weight of the deception, yet relief lingered: her secret arrangement remained intact, and her mother's welfare was safe. 2 days later, David confided in his younger sister, Gina, showing her Sarah's picture. Gina's reaction was fierce. "She's from my school," Gina exclaimed, appalled. "She's poor, rude, on scholarship." "David, what are you thinking?" David explained calmly. He hired Sarah for 2 months to stop his father's pressure. Gina was outraged. "You can't involve someone like that. You'll disgrace the family." "She's perfect for this," David insisted. "She's quiet, respectful, hardworking, and honest. Don't tell Dad." Gina, still skeptical, reluctantly agreed. "I'm watching her," she warned. At school, Sarah tried to blend in, carrying her books close, heart heavy with the weight of her secret. Gina confronted her, delivering a sharp warning. Sarah remained calm, silent, letting her strength speak for itself. Students watched in awe as Sarah stood her ground. Gina, humiliated, retreated, plotting revenge. A week later, Sarah returned to the streets with her tray of bread. Her mother had been rushed to the hospital for urgent surgery, costing 10 million naira. Sarah panicked. She had no way to raise the funds. David intercepted her, shocked and angry. "What are you doing, Sarah? I told you to stop hawking." "I didn't want to bother you," she whispered. "You're not a burden," he said. "I'll handle it." David paid the hospital bills in full. Sarah watched, overwhelmed, as nurses wheeled her mother away for surgery. Relief washed over her. She wept quietly, grateful for someone who truly cared. After hours, the doctor emerged, announcing success. Her mother would recover. Tears streamed down Sarah's face, a mixture of exhaustion, joy, and disbelief. David comforted her silently. For the first time, she felt supported. When they returned home, Gina confronted David, furious over the money spent. David revealed his feelings, asserting he loved Sarah. Gina, enraged, threatened to tell their father. David warned her he knew her secrets, silencing her. The next day, Gina attacked Sarah at school with insults and threats. Sarah's patience snapped. Calm but firm, she stood her ground, exposing Gina's weakness and leaving the students laughing at the confrontation. Humiliated, Gina retreated, plotting revenge. Gina stormed to her father, claiming deceit and insult. Mr. Williams, shocked, demanded answers from David. David explained his motives and his growing love for Sarah. Mr. Williams, furious and protective of his family, demanded David end the arrangement. David refused. His love for Sarah was real. He raced to her apartment, explaining everything. Sarah, worried yet relieved, learned David loved her and intended to be with her despite obstacles. The morning after Sarah had moved into the apartment, she woke to the soft sunlight spilling through the curtains. For a moment, she stared at the ceiling, letting the warmth wash over her. The silence of the apartment was almost unfamiliar, no shouting hawkers, no honking cars, no sharp calls for attention. For the first time in years, she felt rested, even if just for a few hours. The bed was soft, the sheets smooth against her skin. She rolled over carefully, remembering that David had promised she could live here peacefully for the next 2 months, and for the first time, she allowed herself a quiet smile. David, meanwhile, had left early, citing an early meeting with his father. She hadn't asked him for details, but something in the way he had explained his plans yesterday made her believe he was serious about keeping his word. She got up slowly, careful not to make any noise, and opened the wardrobe. Clothes neatly arranged, shoes lined up like tiny soldiers, bags stacked with care. It amazed her how one person's organization could make another feel completely disoriented. She picked a simple dress and got ready, trying to imagine how she would present herself if Mr. Williams decided to test her patience today. The apartment was equipped with a small kitchenette. Sarah moved there cautiously, finding cups, plates, and even some breakfast essentials. She poured herself a glass of water, then a cup of tea, sipping it slowly. She had never taken her time eating before. Her days were always rushed, always dictated by someone else's clock or the demands of survival. Now, she could breathe. She could even plan. And the thought of planning gave her a strange thrill. When David returned later, he found her sitting at the small table, leafing through a notebook. He smiled softly, noticing the calm in her posture. "Good morning," he said quietly. "Morning," she replied, looking up, startled for a moment, then smiling lightly. "You came back early." "I finished my meeting sooner than expected," he said, sitting across from her. He studied her quietly for a moment. "How's everything?" Sarah hesitated. The last 2 days had been surreal. She had a place to stay, money in her pocket, and the weight of constant struggle had lifted slightly. But she wasn't blind to the tension simmering beneath the surface, the fragile balance of pretending, of keeping secrets. "It's different," she said softly. David leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Different can be good." "Yes, different is good," she echoed, though she wasn't entirely sure if she meant it about her new life or about the man in front of her. They didn't speak much after breakfast. Instead, they moved to the living room. David's father had insisted they maintain appearances, so she needed to learn the small nuances of David's world, how he moved, how he spoke, how his family might observe them. David was patient, guiding her gently, answering every question, no matter how small or trivial. "You'll get used to it," he said with a faint grin. "It's only 2 months, remember?" Sarah nodded. The words echoed in her mind. 2 months. 2 months of safety, of comfort, of not having to hawk bread in the sun. 2 months of pretending, of walking a line she had never imagined walking before. And she was determined to make it through without faltering. Her first real test came that afternoon. David's father had summoned them for an impromptu lunch. Sarah dressed carefully in one of the dresses from the boutique, choosing soft colors and simple jewelry. David drove her in his car, explaining what she might expect. She clutched the seat nervously, her heart racing. When they arrived, Mr. Williams was already seated at the head of a long table, his expression unreadable. He looked older than she had imagined, his hair peppered with gray, his eyes sharp and calculating. David introduced her formally, and she gave a small, polite nod, feeling the weight of every gaze on her. "Sit," Mr. Williams commanded, gesturing toward the chair beside David. "I want to see if my son has brought someone suitable." Sarah's palms grew sweaty. She reminded herself that she was here on David's terms, for his reasons. She had to be calm, measured, respectful. She took her seat slowly, trying to meet his gaze without flinching. The lunch passed slowly. Mr. Williams asked questions, about her studies, her family, her future plans. Each answer had to be perfect, polished, without giving away the slightest hint of the truth. She spoke carefully, each word chosen as though walking a tightrope over a pit of fire. David's presence beside her was grounding, his subtle touches, the reassuring squeeze of her hand, reminded her that she was not entirely alone. By the end of the lunch, Mr. Williams was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Sarah in a way that made her stomach twist. Then, finally, he nodded once. "I see why my son chose you," he said softly, almost to himself. The words were simple, but they carried weight. David exhaled quietly beside her, relief flickering in his eyes. Sarah, despite herself, felt a small surge of pride. She had survived this test, this first challenge. The next few days were a blur of adjustment. Sarah learned routines, how to enter the mansion, where to sit at meals, when to speak, and when to stay quiet. She practiced small talk with the staff, learned the nuances of polite conversation in wealthy circles, and even started to feel a sense of belonging. But the shadow of Gina lingered. She knew it was only a matter of time before David's sister tried to assert herself again. It happened sooner than expected. Gina appeared at the mansion unexpectedly, claiming to check on her brother's business, but the sharp glint in her eyes betrayed her true intent. Sarah had just returned from the market with some fresh fruit David had asked her to pick up. She held the basket carefully, moving silently through the hallway when Gina appeared. "Well, well," Gina said, voice dripping with forced sweetness. "If it isn't the famous Sarah. How is my brother's little project doing today?" Sarah froze but didn't drop her basket. She knew confrontation was coming, it was only a matter of time. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin slightly, and replied politely, "I'm doing well, thank you." Gina smirked, moving closer, her perfume filling the air. "Don't think I don't know what's going on here. If it isn't the famous Sarah. How is my brother's little project doing today?" Sarah froze but didn't drop her basket. She knew confrontation was coming, it was only a matter of time. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin slightly, and replied politely, "I'm doing well, thank you." Gina smirked, moving closer, her perfume filling the air. "Don't think I don't know what's going on here. My brother has brought a poor girl into my home, and you think you can pass for someone else? How charming." Sarah didn't flinch. She met Gina's gaze evenly. "I am who I am," she said softly, but firmly. "I'm not pretending to be anyone else for myself. Only for David." Gina's smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of anger. "Only for David?" she hissed. "Do you think you can charm him with your tears and your little act? You don't belong here." Sarah inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "I'm not here to belong," she said calmly. "I'm here to help, as agreed. Beyond that, I'm irrelevant to you." Gina's face turned red with fury. "Irrelevant?" she spat. "You dare speak to me like that?" Before the situation could escalate, David appeared in the hallway. His presence alone commanded attention. "Gina," he said quietly, but sharply. "Leave it. Now." Gina froze, glancing between the two of them. "David," she. "Now, Gina," he interrupted firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This ends here. She is staying. I am asking you as your brother to respect that." For a long moment, Gina glared at Sarah, then at David, before turning sharply on her heel and storming away, her heels clicking angrily against the marble floor. Sarah exhaled, tension leaving her body slowly. David stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. "I'm fine," she said, though her heart still raced. "She's dangerous, though. I can feel it." "I know," David said softly. "But I'll handle her. You don't have to." Over the next few weeks, Sarah became more confident in her new life. She learned to navigate the mansion, to interact with staff, and even began assisting David with minor household decisions. Her confidence grew, not because she was wealthy or powerful, but because she had survived, adapted, and proven herself in a world that had always seemed untouchable. One evening, as she prepared dinner for David, she thought about her mother in the hospital. Her heart ached at the thought of her mother's vulnerability, but she was grateful that David had ensured her mother's safety. She smiled softly to herself, realizing that for the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting alone. David returned later than usual that evening, tired from business meetings. He found Sarah in the kitchen, her hair tied back, concentration etched on her face. He leaned against the doorway, watching her quietly. "You look at peace," he said softly. Sarah glanced up, startled, then smiled faintly. "I am. I think." David stepped closer, resting a hand gently on her back. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "Not for the money, not for the school, not for the apartment, but for who you are. You're strong, Sarah. Stronger than anyone I've ever known." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. I couldn't have done it without you, either." He shook his head, smiling softly. "No. You've done everything yourself. I just provided the opportunity. The rest, that was all you." For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, life could be different. That strength, courage, and perseverance could lead to something beautiful. And as they sat together that night, the quiet hum of the city outside the mansion, she realized that 2 months had already changed her life more than she had imagined. But even in her heart, a small voice whispered caution. Gina was still out there. David's father remained wary. And the world they had entered was fragile, delicate, and unpredictable. Sarah knew she had to stay alert, to navigate carefully, and to hold on to her courage. For now, though, she allowed herself a small, quiet hope. A hope that life could finally be kind. The morning sun filtered through the curtains once more, but this time, Sarah didn't feel the same calm she had grown accustomed to. The mansion was quiet, but a subtle tension hung in the air. David had left early for meetings, and Sarah found herself wandering the halls alone, listening to the faint echoes of her own footsteps. The past weeks had been filled with small victories, careful adjustments, and a constant need to anticipate Gina's next move. But today, something felt different. As she reached the kitchen, she noticed a folded note on the counter, neatly placed where she couldn't miss it. Picking it up, she saw the familiar handwriting of David's father. Be careful. Not everything is as it seems. Sarah frowned. She had expected challenges from Gina, but the cryptic warning suggested something deeper. Her pulse quickened, the sense of unease creeping into her chest. She placed the note down and tried to shake the feeling off. There was breakfast to prepare, errands to complete, and the careful routines that kept her safe. But no matter how she focused, the warning lingered like a shadow over her thoughts. Later that morning, David returned, visibly exhausted but smiling faintly. "Morning," he said, kissing her forehead softly. "You've been quiet today." "I found this note," Sarah said, handing it to him. It worries me." David read it carefully, his expression hardening slightly. "It's nothing new," he said finally. "My father worries about everything. He thinks the world is full of threats, and, maybe he's right. But don't let it consume you." Sarah nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. She had learned to trust her instincts over the past weeks, and they were warning her now. The afternoon brought news that shook the household. A sudden power outage plunged the mansion into darkness. The staff scrambled to light candles and lanterns, while David rushed to check the backup generators. Sarah stood in the hallway, gripping the banister tightly, heart racing. Gina's voice rang out through the corridor. "Well, isn't this convenient?" she sneered. She stepped into the candlelight, her eyes glinting maliciously. "A little chaos, and suddenly the world is mine to control." Sarah braced herself. She had anticipated this confrontation, but the intensity surprised her. "Gina," she said firmly, meeting her gaze, "what do you want?" "To remind everyone who truly belongs here," Gina spat. "And to make sure you understand your place." Before Sarah could respond, Gina lunged toward her, hands outstretched. Instinctively, Sarah stepped back, slipping slightly on the polished floor. The two women faced each other, tension crackling like static. David appeared just then, his presence commanding. "Enough," he said sharply. "Both of you stop." Gina turned toward him, anger flashing. "You think you can stop me? This girl is nothing. She doesn't belong here." "She belongs here as much as anyone," David said calmly, though his voice carried authority. "She has proven herself in ways you can't even imagine. Leave now, or you'll regret it." For a long moment, Gina glared at him, then at Sarah, before storming off with a final hiss. Sarah exhaled shakily, relief washing over her. But the encounter left her unsettled. Gina wasn't finished, she knew that much. The days that followed were tense. Sarah focused on maintaining routines, staying calm, and keeping her composure despite Gina's underhanded attempts to unsettle her. She handled small sabotage with quiet precision, correcting mistakes before they escalated and earning subtle nods of approval from the staff. One evening, as the sky turned a deep orange, David approached her with a serious expression. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Sarah followed him to the study, a room lined with books and photographs of the family's history. He closed the door behind them. "I know you've been wary of Gina," he began. But there's something else. Something you need to know about this family, and about why I brought you here." Her heart raced. She had anticipated challenges from Gina, from his father, but now David's tone suggested something even deeper. "What is it?" she asked softly. David took a deep breath. "Our family, we have enemies. People who would go to great lengths to destabilize us. My father's warnings weren't just about you fitting in, they were about keeping you safe. Because if anyone knew what you might represent, well, it could be dangerous." Sarah's stomach tightened. She had come into this world cautiously, prepared to navigate social dynamics and hidden rivalries. But now the stakes were higher than she had imagined. Dangerous how? David looked at her gravely. "There are people who want to hurt the family, take everything we've built. And you're part of this now, whether you like it or not." Sarah swallowed hard, realizing that the life she had fought so hard to step into was far more complex than she had imagined. But fear did not stop her. She had faced challenges before, and she had survived. "Then I'll do whatever it takes," she said firmly. "To protect this family, and to protect myself." David nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "I knew you'd say that." The next weeks were a test like no other. Gina's efforts escalated, attempting to manipulate staff, create mistrust, and expose weaknesses. Sarah countered every move with calm intelligence, thinking several steps ahead. She became adept at reading intentions, predicting actions, and responding without hesitation. One evening, David's father called for a family meeting. The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah took her place quietly, her hands folded, ready for whatever was about to unfold. "My son has told me much about you," Mr. Williams began, eyes scanning the room. "And I have watched your actions carefully. You have shown patience, intelligence, and strength. Qualities that are rare and valuable. I trust you understand the responsibilities that come with being part of this family." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She realized then that this was more than survival, it was about earning respect, trust, and recognition in a world that could be unforgiving. David leaned toward her, whispering, "You've done well. Very well." As the meeting concluded, Gina's attempts to disrupt the family were quietly but effectively neutralized. Her presence was diminished, her influence curtailed. Sarah had proven herself not through force, but through strategy, calmness, and unwavering focus. The following day, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Her mother had been released from the hospital, her health slowly improving. The sight of her mother, smiling weakly but genuinely, filled Sarah with warmth and gratitude. She realized that the sacrifices, the courage, and the struggles had all been worth it. That evening, as she walked through the garden with David, the air cool and scented with blooming flowers, she felt a sense of belonging she had never imagined. Not because of wealth, status, or position, but because she had endured, adapted, and remained true to herself. "Do you ever think about the past?" David asked quietly, his hand brushing against hers. "All the time," Sarah admitted. "But I also know that the past doesn't define us. We define ourselves by how we respond to it." David smiled, a rare softness in his expression. "And you've responded well. Better than I could have imagined." The days turned into weeks, and Sarah's confidence grew. She moved through the mansion with ease, handling both routine and unexpected challenges with grace. Her relationship with David deepened, built on trust, mutual respect, and shared understanding. The shadow of Gina's hostility faded, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement that Sarah belonged. One evening, as they sat in the library, David spoke softly. "I want you to know something, Sarah. You've changed this family, not just by fitting in, but by reminding us what courage and integrity look like. You've taught us more than you realize." Sarah looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "I've learned too," she said. "About strength, about patience, and about the importance of standing firm in who you are." David nodded, eyes shining with a mixture of pride and affection. Then we've both gained from this journey. As night fell, Sarah stood by the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. She thought about the days she had spent on the streets, the bread she had carried, the struggles she had endured. And she realized that each challenge had prepared her for this moment, this life she had fought to claim, this peace she had earned, and the hope that now filled her heart. She turned to David, who had joined her silently. "I never imagined life could be like this," she admitted softly. He took her hand, holding it gently. "Neither did I," he said. "But here we are. Together." For the first time in her life, Sarah allowed herself to believe that the future could be bright, that courage could bring reward, and that love, trust, and perseverance could indeed transform even the most unlikely of circumstances. And in that quiet, luminous night, with the city below and the mansion around them, Sarah knew that she had not only survived but had truly begun to live.